Welcome back to CAST A COMMOTION. Thanks again for checking out this podcast. It has been a goddamn minute, but I wanted to ask myself, do I want to make content so frequently that I run out of good quality content to talk about, or do I just want to make the podcast when I think there's important discussions to be had? Now, the discussion to be had today is the progression to Fab 3.0. I don't know that it's an official thing yet. I don't know that anybody can even tell us that. All I do know is that as somebody who tests extensively, goes through numbers, puts stuff into spreadsheets, I have noticed that we, in fact, have seen a design shift for sure. So this time on Cast a Commotion, 3.0 and the things you need to know. So everybody, thanks for hanging on. I know it's been a minute for the podcast format. I've been very active on YouTube, but I wanted to make sure that every podcast had some design philosophy or something that could really help people. I want to get to record this a lot more, but some changes at work have made it a lot more difficult. I'm working a lot more hours than I was, unfortunately, and nobody cares about that. What we're here to talk about is the change in game design that we've noticed from Part the Mistveil on. We're going to talk more about when it started, how it started, and all of that. But I want to talk about how we used to have a deterministic form of this game. Now, what that means is that we could basically tell how a lot of the games were going to be going based on raw value and numbers alone. There was very little variance for a while. There were always power spike cards, but they always felt really bad, and we've been complaining about them for a very long time. Most of the time it involves the mechanic of drawing cards, okay? When I see 4 cards in hand, 1 in arsenal, I can start to do math, right? I can start to say, we'll just use Phi as an example because I'm very experienced with Phi. Not really a relevant hero at this time, but very easy to do this example with. So we could say, I see a 4-card hand and 1 card in the arsenal. You could just basically multiply that by 4, and that's how much damage is probably being represented, right? It's not, it's not a mystery is what he's going to do. Obviously, then we start talking about this repeatable, super reliable way of determining turn cycles. And then we have cards like in Phi, Art of War. In the past few episodes of anything I've done on YouTube, my deck techs, my unpacking the weeks, all of that, please check those out. I've talked about Art of War a few times, and I'm just... As I say in those, I'm not a ban heavy guy, and I would never want that card banned. I would never want that card banned. But it represents such a variance that you cannot account for, and in your head, what it does is it makes you play around it at all times. Because now you're accounting for, what if they have the Art of War? How do I account for the 2 more cards? What are they going to draw? Can I determine any of that? What is going to be the +1 effect? Is it going to be as devastating as landing some on hits? Is he going to Command and Conquer go? Like, it's just all of this stuff you have to now start thinking about because of the card Art of War. To a lesser extent, some other cards that draw you cards, but I don't think they're as much of a problem. I want to recognize that Art of War is a problem, but I want to discover every game space possible before banning that card. So in the beginning, we had all of these heroes with pretty straightforward values. Dorinthia, Rhinar, Katsu, all of these heroes had pretty straightforward values. And then we start to get pretty complicated pretty fast with the Monarch heroes. And then it just goes off the rails with variants when we start talking about Tales of Aria. What does this have to do with this episode? These are what I call the 1.0 phase. And everybody else. Like, it's not just me, but it's the company itself. And as far as everyone can identify, what the 1.0 phase was about was how can we experiment and push the boundaries of face-up value to where we can really see what's happening and people can respond and interact as much as humanly possible inside of a game with a small amount of variance in it. I think we did that pretty well, but some sets, obviously the COVID nightmare that is the Tales of Aria elemental set, you just couldn't account for I want to call it the American problem, but we're just insanely aggressive and just have a different philosophy and we'll just break cards left and right. Every country has their own specific style of playing, but as far as we can tell, Americans are a bit more aggressive. Shocker. And New Zealand, Australia, and Europe play more for the long game and try to think a bit more. That's not to say the American style is wrong. That's not to say that the others are better. That's just to say that with such a small testing team, you cannot, during COVID, test for what Tales of Aria was going to be. But that really did push the boundaries of what we consider face-up value, okay? And that was all straightforward, right? And then, like I said, we saw Lexi, for example. While Three of a Kind was an issue, it did restrict how you could put arrows into the arsenal. But now that Lexi's gone, we don't have Voltaire, and Voltaire was, as I've said, when people were talking about, oh, we got to ban Art of War, we got to ban Three of a Kind, I have always said, I'm sure it's recorded somewhere. I thought Voltaire was the problem. Voltaire is the problem, 100%. And that's why when people start talking about banning these generic cards or these very good cards that are not always staples, but can help design space quite a bit and unlock unique potential, I don't like banning. I'd rather look at every other design spot. Like I know Voltaire was the problem, and I'm sure many others would agree. If you really look at the core of the problem, it was Voltaire. So that was the power spike problem back then. We also had things like Prism, Sculptor of the Arclight. Infinite Go Again is just not good for the game. They were just handing out Go Again like candy back then. I can't really describe, because it felt like the game was supposed to be restrictive and you were supposed to have, just a thinking process with how your turn was supposed to go. But there were just so many things that just said, get Go Again. And yeah, it sped up the game, but it didn't necessarily help character development, class fantasy. It didn't help those things necessarily. It was just game. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. The game was fun. I loved I still love the game. I loved the game back then. I love it now. But 1.0 was insane. It was a period of experimenting, pushing the envelope of straight up values. But then it meant that, again, not trying to make myself sound like there's people way smarter than I am. I'm just going to say that right now. But my profession inherently makes me good at tracking cards and doing values. That's just what my profession is, okay? That's what my career is. So it felt kind of unfair, and I could see where the need for variance was there. And then for people like me, everyone has their own different play style. I hated adding the variance. Multiple times I wanted to take Art of War out of the Phi deck. Multiple times I wanted to take anything that made me rely. Like in Levia, I hated Art of War because I'd always brick or something. And it's just that variance was not my play style. So my whole existence has been, I want to try to minimize variance. Enter Fab 2.0. The cut point for Fab 1, in my opinion, everybody's going to have their own opinion on this. We can't really know for sure unless LSS specifically says so. Now they say it was Uprising. I don't believe so. I believe Uprising was the stoppage of the first edition Unlimited print and a progression in marketing for the company and a progression in how they design draftable sets. I believe that. But Uprising is not when it took place, I do not believe. I believe Dynasty was a midpoint, and then I believe 2.0 really took hold. Outsiders? I want to say Outsiders is when 2.0 really took hold. And my discussion with that is that during Uprising, we still had Phi. We still had the face-up value. We still had Dramaya, the face-up value. The only real wild card was kind of Icelander, but even then, it was all... You look at Hamilton's deck that took that year, it was just raw numbers and value. So I still firmly believe that Uprising was just 1.0 coming to an end, and not the epitome of 1.0, but a good look at it. That's also when we start to see collectability becoming an issue. Obviously, the dragons were not exactly exciting for anybody who was not Delulu, which is fine. I can't really see what they were thinking with that. And then in Dynasty, it became a little better, right? Because everybody got their own play toys. It was just weird. It was a weird time. Again, 1.0 was just experimentation city. I'm happy for that. I'm happy that we survived and exceeded expectations at that time. Survived is a weird term based on what I had just said, but COVID was around that time. So during 2.0 is Outsiders up. And the reason I believe that is Outsiders was a return to, let's try a format that's not talented. Can we revisit all of our design philosophies, what we've learned from Tales of Aria, what we've learned from Uprising, what we've learned from Welcome to Wraith, what we've learned from everything, every release? Can we make it a complete product and reset with a talentless set? And Outsiders it was the result. I love Outsiders. It was insanely good, well-designed, not too crazy. Obviously, people will point to Codex of Frailty and say, that card is way above rate. You got to have something in the set. Like, there's always going to be something. And to be honest, you can kind of plan around Codex of Frailty. I have done it in games. It's not as power spiky as Art of War or any of these other things that draw you 10,000 cards for one reason. You know what's in their graveyard. You know what's probably in their deck if you're at the level where you're worried about this card. You can plan around this. You can try to either block with cards to put them in the discard in case you want to try to save them for the Codex of Frailty. You can play around this. This is a very good card, yes. But there's a lot of ways you can plan around this card. You just have to be doing it if you're playing against an assassin or a ranger. 2.0, in my eyes, was very short-lived. Lessons were learned extraordinarily fast because I believe, I can't prove this, but lessons were learned quickly and responded to extraordinarily fast because it feels like the development team had matured. With Outsiders, I saw a whole new philosophy of, well, there's a lot of this face-up value, but then there's other zones that we can explore outside of just the banish. We don't need talents to make cards good. We can just make cards decent across the board and usable. And Outsiders was the epitome of that. Design slowed down quite a bit. I feel like we wanted to try to draw the game back down without adding ice again. And like I said, Bright Lights is another example of this. A little too complicated of a set. A lot of people dislike this set, and I understand why. I get all of the reasons why that's a thing. But I can't ever say I don't like a set. Bright Lights had a lot going for it. But you have to have mechanologist players or players who are more willing to explore game spaces. And in this game, unfortunately, we have mains. It's a whole concept I'm not a huge fan of, but at the same time, it's a cheaper way to play. It makes you better, because you know more of the matchups into your specific game. It makes you an expert in that. And that's also a whole merit on its own. And that was a whole, I don't even know if that was an intended consequence of the game. 1.0 and 2.0 rolled up into a ball, goes through crazy experimentations, and then in 2.0, refinement of those experimentations and a re-understanding of the game's design philosophy. Not as much go again was given during that set. It was very, very cut and dry, and the go again that was given wasn't really given. It was pre-existing, basically. Ravenous Rabbles, things like that can help the turn go a little bit wider. So we still had all of the problems of 1.0 seeping through because you would have all of the extra go again that's just sprinkled like candy all over the place from 1.0 cards that are still legal. And then you would still have those power spike cards that were still legal. And then it met Outsiders right there at the epicenter and said, hey, here's all these really solid cards that are not designed around this much go again. Here's all these cards that are very good in draft with each other. And then you sprinkle in that little essence of 1.0 and you get a nightmare, right? So 2.0 felt choppy because of that. It was a wave pool. It is just everything cluttering and bouncing all around, and we're expanding on heroes, which I traditionally don't like, but with discussions I keep having. I get that it's just the direction we have to go to catch more people into the game. It would be wonderful if everybody could find a hero they liked. So 2.0 continues for a very short time, super short time. I think it only lasted 4 sets. Outsiders, Dusk Till Dawn being legitimately, in my opinion, a not great set. People like to rag on Bright Lights, but Dusk Till Dawn was very limited in who wanted it. It introduced a few heroes on its own, but mostly relied on people liking Monarch heroes, and one of the best Monarch heroes but 2 of them are gone. And it also reintroduced Prism to the game. Bright Lights followed up past that, and it just missed with the community, I feel like. A lot of people are calling, well, not a lot of people. The influencers that I see and some of the people who are at my level, which is not very high, are talking about how it was a failure. I personally don't think it was. I loved the set. I think it has very good cards, very good additions, but it was a lot of filler. They could have cut cards like that just make no sense, like Razzle Dazzle. Fun art, but there's a bunch of cards like that. And then I felt the same thing with all of the cards in Dusk Till Dawn. Remember when I had said the game had slowed down? I feel like they were afraid of what they did in Tales of Aria. I feel like they were afraid of what they did in Monarch. Took all those experimentations, learned how to make the game decent in Outsiders. But then upon bringing back an old hero, decided to completely nuke a set, Dusk Till Dawn, in order to make sure that Prism didn't just roll the meta. And then in Bright Lights, just wanted to make sure that Dash or somebody didn't just roll the meta. So they deliberately underpowered these sets, which is fine, because with the Living Legend system in mind, all of those older crazy heroes would eventually rotate out of the standard classic constructed meta. And you would just have a naturally slowing down meta. That's fine. That's good design. But they don't let heroes Living Legend. They tweak and tune things and try to make things last a bit longer. This is always going to be a complaint from me. I wish they would just use the system they invented. After that comes Heavy Hitters, and I believe that is the epitome. That is the amalgamation. And many people share this opinion. This is not a unique opinion. That Heavy Hitters was crazy good. That the draft and the limited was, again, deterministic. A lot of the times you couldn't go to Fatigue because the set was designed so well that a game would come to an end. It just would. You couldn't get through limited with Fatigue at all. You could try, but it often didn't work mostly because of the block value determination. And on top of that, a lot of the heroes and cards that were in that set felt unique, fun. It was a very exciting set. It was like what I think Everfest was aiming to be, the fun set, but Heavy Hitters was the fun set. A lot of good support for some of the classic heroes, and learned all of the lessons from 1.0, and made a better draft format than 2.0. It was the best bookend. Outsiders to Heavy, I believe that was 2.0. And then we get to the next part of the story. Part the Mist Veil. That is when I believe 3.0 begins. And it becomes very apparent as of Pro Tour Amsterdam and all of the other events, all the Battle Hardens around the world. What is 3.0? Hidden values and variants. Many times I have this conversation with people. I don't hear the opinion that variance is going to kill the game, but a few of my community members have informed me that many players were considering quitting because of the variance. And that's unfortunate to hear, because we need a little bit of variance in the game, yes. But the variance that they were revealing was too high. We're talking about Zen. A hero we've talked about multiple times, about how we just need to find something to get rid of to deal with Zen. Now, what do I mean by variance? Earlier I talked about 3 of a kind in Art of War. And they continue to be a problem today. Not 3 of a kind so much, but Art of War keeps popping up in the conversation. Okay? It just keeps popping up in the conversation. And I can't think of a good way around this card. It would be, in my opinion, better to design heroes with Art of War in mind But then that restricts, that's why they banned like Crown of Seeds and a few other things. They just didn't want to do that. So I fear Art of War is primed for a ban. We're coming up on an announcement in October, and I'm so fearful that they're going to ban that card. I never like bans. I never do. I feel like they harm design space, but they restrict the design space for developers. So, or I meant for deck builders, it harms it. For developers, it harms it. It's just the logical conclusion is we're going to see the Art of War ban. I don't want it. I hope you don't do it, LSS. Just don't do it. And the reason that the Art of War ban is legitimately just Zen. It's insane, you know, that he can just block up, get the Crouching Tigers, go fetch the Transcend cards he got earlier, have a 5-6 card hand, Art of War, the Crouching Tiger away, and just absolutely run away with the game at that point. You cannot account for the amount of value that's going to be coming at you. We know what it's going to be largely. And I guess in a sense we can account for it, but you can't stop it. It's too high of a spike. It's too many card draw. It's too much card draw. And then you can get more Crouching Tigers from other effects and Art of War again. It's just not conducive to the game. So now I want to talk about what is the game. In my mind, this game, when I use my mind, this game is a fighting game where you shouldn't get stronger as the game goes, but every fighting game fucking does that. Every fighting game does that. Street Fighter, you have your supers and your ultras that only pound up as the game goes on and you get more damage. Mortal Kombat, you get your fatal art, the more damage you get. Every game has this turnaround mechanic. But in card games, it's not like that. In card games, that catch-up mechanic that I'm talking about isn't a catch-up mechanic. It's just a draw mechanic. And since that can happen early in the game, you can get your ultra really early. You can get your super, your fatal art. You can get everything very early. And that is not how a fighting game works. So obviously I'm really comparing this to some of my favorite titles. And I'm not sure if that's entirely correct to do, but I'm trying to talk about my perspective and how I look at this game. I look at this game as a fighting game. And that's what really appealed to me. You know, I was huge into that. Me and my friends would have our sticks out and be rotating, just circling it, passing off the stick to the next guy, one after the other. You know what I mean? Fighting games are in my blood. I want to get back to them in the video game form, but Fab is so good. I haven't needed to. What I'm saying here is that in 3.0, we need to hard pivot from this variance of the card spike because our ultras should not be coming out turn 1 or turn 2. Our supers should not be coming out that early. You should not be able to just pound out the game and immediately run away with the game from the get-go. That's degenerate. God, I'm just convincing myself into the Art of War ban, and I just don't want it. I don't want it, but I think it's what's best for the community. It'll also be another power spike card they don't have to worry about purchasing, and I know people love to talk about the price of this game. Granted, I have never recommended that card for many decks, and on my honor roll back here, my decks on my shelf that are all together, I think only 2 of those decks have Art of War in it. It's Levia and Phi. We're going to see. October's coming. We're going to see what these bans look like, okay? Is it the right direction to go in variants? No. My argument was just laid out. In a card game, you don't get the same kind of variance that you get with a fighting game. It's not a controllable moment. Now, if LSS or anybody remotely relevant to that process or development ever listens to this, I believe it'd be really fucking cool to maybe put on a weapon or a piece of armor when you reach 10 or 13 life, like a Carrion Husk. We've already experimented with this design space one time. Okay. The Carrion Husk goes away at 13 life, but if you're at 10 life, maybe your weapon flips over and does 1 more damage. You know, maybe when shit gets a little bit desperate, you get a super. You're supposed to get weaker in a fighting game, but you do have to have some kind of ultra catch-up mechanic. I don't know if that's too much. I don't know. I'm just talking about controlled variants, something that somebody can plan for. Okay, that is more interactivity. Either way, that's just a little thing we can hope for in the future. What does this mean for veteran players that we're heading into the era of variants? As of right now, it's bad. All of the veteran players know up and down that variance is not good for this game. The reason that a lot of us are attracted to this game, some of us came from Magic, some of us came from Yu-Gi-Oh! For example, I just tried Yu-Gi-Oh! A few days ago, and holy shit, it is just as bad. I'm not going to call Magic a bad game, but I'm going to say that my opponent dropped out some Harpies or something and played Elegant Egotist, swept the board, and I just didn't draw any monsters, and I lost in 2 turns. That's boring. I don't like a game where I don't get to play the game. Magic has the same problem. Get mana fucked, you're not going to play the game. I think it's detrimental to make it so you fundamentally cannot play the game. Flesh and Blood solves that a lot of the time, and I think that's because of the lack of variance that they control. So adding more variance to the game breaks the fundamental tenet that I perceive in the game. Is that real? I don't know. But it breaks a fundamental tenet to add more variance. You're too strong in the early, you're too strong in the late. If there's too much variance, it's just not consistent with what I feel like Flesh and Blood is. Okay. What does this mean for new players? Accessibility. You don't have to get as good at the game. You don't have to put in as many reps. You don't have to do anything really. You just pick up what you perceive as one of the best decks if you got the money for it and let variance do its thing, and you'll steamroll veterans left and right. I have not experienced this. We've seen some new players in my area bring Zen and a few others, and I have beat them. I haven't lost to one yet. That doesn't mean it can't happen. That doesn't mean it won't happen. It's just not. It's not good for veteran players to keep long-term players. It's not good for them to keep long-term players. Variance is not the answer. To get new players, variance can help, but I again think it's detrimental because then they're just going to start blaming their deck on luck and things like that, and we just get into some terrible thing. So, where do we go from here? What is the future? I predict LSS is going to be taking quite the drastic move and trying to stop variance as much as possible. I don't know what that looks like. I know Art of War is on the chopping block. We all know Art of War has been on the chopping block since it was printed. Arcane Rising, a lot of people point to Tales of Aria as one of the hardcore sets. Holy shit, Arcane Rising introduced a whole hero who feels like he breaks the game. And I want to talk about that a little bit because Kano is showing up left and right. He just doesn't play the game the same way anyone else does. Icelander played it a bit differently, and that's fine. But we have 2 new wizards coming out here in Rosetta in just a little bit. Maybe 2 weeks? 1 week? Something like that, somewhere in there. Okay. And I've watched their gameplay. I've looked at their heroes. I've looked at the card pool. They do not play the game like Kano does. They play it more like Icelander does, but with different flavors and different little sprinklings of fun, right? Kano's got to go, man. He is the definition of variance. For example, in the last skirmish where I was playing Living Legend with Kano, opt 6, stack the deck, opt 2, dig, all at instant speed while my opponent's trying to kill me. And I just dig through, I think, like 10 cards total and find the combo and win. That is the definition of variance. There's no way they could have planned for that. You cannot plan for that. They had me dead on the board. You know what I mean? It's just, he's pretty bad. And then you have cards like Art of War and Command and Conquer, which are just, I will never say Command and Conquer needs a ban. It's too solid of a card. And I mean, like, it is perfectly powered, which is a problem because it is perfectly powered. You have to respond to it. But at the same time, it's very predictable, and you know what you got to do to get around it. Art of War, you can't really prepare for too much. It doesn't take any action points. It's too much. It's just too much. So the future of this game, I believe we are going to be down-ticking variance, and I think we're going to be slowing down quite a bit. I want to see the return of Ice, but with his current development pattern of slowing down, again, Mistveil is kind of a bad example of that, but not at the same time, because New can slow the game down. And then in Outsiders, Uzuri can slow the game down. Every one of these heroes can be slowed down right now without Ice. But the future is slowing down the game, down-powering the game, and expanding the hero pool, which is not my favorite thing. So those are my notes on how far we've come in Flesh and Blood from 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0. All I'm really trying to do with this episode is bring up the problems that we've had and discuss what you can look forward to. And now I want to talk about some of the solutions that I believe are available to us in 3.0. Okay. So we've printed traps. We've printed things that prevent some kind of two-go wide thing with assassins and rangers, okay? We've also printed Balance of Justice, which helps defense against some of the draw, but that's so ham-fisted. You have to be running this card if you see a hero. You have to have it. It's a have-to-have card because you need to be able to block and then draw 2 cards on top of that to be able to have a hope to defend this. And it's always on the board, so you'll always have it. It's way too ham-fisted of an approach. We need to start seeing, if we want to avoid the Art of War ban, we need to start seeing more things that prevent card draw in general, which could cause a super feels bad for people who are playing with Art of War and things like that. But card draw is not just specifically attached to Art of War. It's also on things like Snatch, all this other stuff. It needs to be like, not so much, maybe like an on hit would be very fair, because with heavy hitters, and this is why I talked about all of our sets, so we can always just go back and reference them. Heavy hitters learned all of its lessons and said a lot of the abilities like Go Again, all these action points, all this power, this needs to be predictable, setup capable, and accountable, but also have a little bit of variance in there, because the variance will come from whether or not you choose to block or you choose to attack, right? Certain ways. So with the prevention of draws, you need, Cranial Crush is a really good example of this. You need on hits that can stop the draw. That will hit things like Snatch, all this other stuff, like all these other cards that draw cards on hit. It can open up the design space quite a bit if we start finding cards like that. We're finding all these other weird solutions through a lot of these bigger attacks coming out in these sets, like Blanche, Humble, all this kind of stuff. Why not also add on some generics? Just 1 for 4s without Go Again or something that say when this hits, like, I don't know. We need some kind of punishment. Like Pummel was a good answer for a lot of early Flesh and Blood, but maybe not so much nowadays. It's a little hard to utilize. But something like that could stop draws or delay turns, right? There was a really interesting card that came out called Fact Finding Mission that just flipped over the arsenal. See, now if that said, if it's an instant or if it has no defense value, your opponent can't draw cards or something, like something that didn't just target Art of War, but was does that just target Art of War? I'm not a game designer. I'm not working for LSS. I'm just spitballing here. The future is controlling card draw. That is for sure. We all know that in every card game, card draw is the problem. Every time somebody gets carried away, you let someone draw cards, it's fucked. You are just... So, with things you need to know, get ready for a fundamental change of the game. You're not going to be seeing crazy power spikes anymore because of Part the Mistveil. Part the Mistveil guaranteed that the whole LSS team is going to say, I don't know if we see any more card draw. Maybe they don't ban anything. Maybe they just don't print any more card draw. Maybe they make the tomes restricted or like legendary or something. Like the Odeon of Mystic Tenets was a legendary card, legendary instant that drew cards and had the requirement of having chi to draw even more cards. It traded 2 for 3, but you needed the chi to do it, and you can only have one of them in your deck. That is a good example of like what card draw should be. Maybe the tomes should just be all errated to be legendary. I don't hate that. I don't hate that. Either way, the point is, get ready for the game to slow down. Get ready for variance to tighten up. You're going to need to start practicing and getting a lot better at the fundamentals of this game. You can always do that by listening to the podcast, Cast a Commotion, or checking out the channel for any of the deck techs or anything that I do there to explain how certain decks could be played or should be played. Thanks so much for hanging around, anybody who has listened to Cast a Commotion. I'm sorry about the huge gaps in between the podcast episodes, but they're a lot more philosophical now than they used to be. They used to be really beginner friendly, but this one really talks more about the game design and what to look forward to. It's a little bit weirder. Check out Crash Command Games on eBay now, on TCG Player still. I'm going to be trying to refresh my Flesh and Blood stock quite a bit, but I only post like a playset or 2 at a time, so it sells pretty fast. Love the support. Check me out on Patreon. You know, everything comes out there 3 to 4 days early, and then we can discuss a few things and see if anybody can find anything to help me out there. Like, subscribe me on YouTube, everything. Thanks for listening to Cast a Commotion. And this one is zeroed.